October 3rd, 1944. A desolate strip of coastline on the Baltic Sea. You pull your greatcoat tighter, the wool scratching your neck, but you barely feel the cold. Your eyes are fixed on the gantry. The air itself seems to hold its breath, vibrating with a low, thunderous promise. Then, ignition. A colossal 46-foot spear of steel erupts in a column of fire, tearing itself from the earth with a sound that isn't just heard, but felt deep in your chest. The V-2 rocket, Wunderwaffen 2, climbs faster than any aircraft, punching through the clouds on a perfect, silent arc towards London. It is a technological miracle, a weapon from the future. Welcome to the invisible front, where every statistic tells a story, and every cargo manifest holds a whisper from a world at war. You've just witnessed the pinnacle of aerospace engineering, a machine so advanced it will literally form the basis of the space race. Ever wonder what it truly felt like to stand at the heart of that genius, only to realize with a creeping, sickening dread that it wasn't enough? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you find the journey we're about to take is a valuable one. Invite viewers to share where they are watching from and which invisible piece of technology or logistics fascinates them the most. Now, let's pull back the curtain and uncover the story of the systems that win wars. The triumph of the launch is absolute. You are a German engineer. You and your colleagues have conquered gravity, broken the sound barrier, and delivered a 2,000-pound warhead to an enemy capital from 200 miles away. There is no defense against it. This single machine is a monument to German science, a testament to the power of focused, singular, visionary genius. Your ideology is confirmed. A few brilliant minds, properly supported, will always triumph over the disorganized, decadent masses. But as the sound of the rocket fades, replaced by the wind whipping off the Baltic, the triumph feels thin. It dissolves faster than the contrail. You return to the barracks, the buzz of celebration, but you find your eyes drawn to the tactical maps and the after-action reports pinned to the wall. This is the Peenemünde Paradox. You have this Wunderwaffe, this wonder weapon, and yet the reports from every single front do not speak of a collapsing enemy. They speak of an impossibility. You read the debriefs from Luftwaffe pilots. Their voices, even on paper, seem to shake. They describe aerial swarms. They engage a squadron of P-51s, and even if they win, 3 more squadrons appear on the horizon. They describe formations of B-17s and Lancasters, so vast they blot out the sun, flying day after day, night after night. They shoot down 10, 20, and 100 more take their place. It's an avalanche of aluminum that defies all logic. You look at the summaries from the Eastern Front. The Soviets, who you were told were a subhuman horde, are advancing with tanks. Not just a few, but thousands. Tens of thousands of T-34s. Crude, ugly, mass-produced things, but they swarm your elegant, complex tigers and panthers, overwhelming them with sheer, brutal numbers. And worse, these Soviet armies are being fed, fueled, and armed by the Americans. You see the intelligence on Allied shipping. You, a man who has just watched a spaceship launch, find yourself utterly baffled by a simple truck. The deuce and a half. Reports claim the Allies have millions of them. How can a nation build millions of trucks while also building hundreds of thousands of aircraft and thousands of ships? You see the numbers on the Liberty ships. Your U-boats, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, are sinking them at a furious pace. And yet, Allied shipping tonnage increases every month. The Americans are building them faster than you can sink them. It feels wrong. It's a violation of the natural order. How can brute force quantity possibly defeat visionary quality? Your mind, trained in the precise, elegant equations of rocketry, cannot compute this. The numbers don't add up. The confession hasn't been spoken, but the first hairline crack has appeared in the foundation of your belief. You look at the blueprints for your V2, a weapon requiring 40,000 separate parts and exotic hypergolic fuels, and you suddenly feel a cold dread that has nothing to do with the weather. You're beginning to suspect that the war won't be won by the single, most brilliant weapon. You're beginning to suspect it will be won by the system that can build the most of everything. You walk away from the V2's launch site, that image of fiery perfection seared into your mind, and you begin to see your entire world differently. You are now inside the mind of the Third Reich's industrial scientific complex, and you realize it is not a factory, it is a cathedral. Everything here is built in service of an ideal, a technological dogma. The Wunderwaffen, the wonder weapons, are your high altars. The Me-262 jet, the V2 rocket, the King Tiger tank. These are not just tools of war. They are articles of faith. They are the physical proof of your ideological and intellectual superiority. They are designed to be revolutionary, to be perfect, to be genius. And as you examine them, you feel the undeniable pull of that genius. It is beautiful, it is elegant, and it is fatal. You move to the factory floor at Henschel. Before you stands the Tiger II. It is less a tank than a 70-ton mobile fortress. The sloped frontal armor is effectively immune to any Allied gun. Its long-barreled 88mm cannon can kill a Sherman from over a mile away, long before the American crew even knows they're in its sights. You run a hand over the thick, interlocked steel plates. This is engineering as art. Then you look at the production schedule. The awe evaporates, replaced by a cold, mathematical sickness. To build this one perfect machine requires 300,000 man-hours. It requires exotic alloys and massive specialized tooling. You look deeper, past the armor, and into the guts of the beast. You see the interleaved road wheels, a complex, clever design that distributes weight beautifully. You also see the field reports from the Eastern Front, where those same wheels are hopelessly, permanently clogged with frozen mud, rendering the entire 70-ton fortress immobile. You see the overstressed transmission that fails under the immense torque, and the fuel-hungry engine that gives it a laughable operational range. It is a perfect predator that is chained to its own complexity, a masterpiece that can barely move. You pivot. You are on an airfield in Bavaria. The air screams. And Me-262 streaks past, landing with a high-pitched whine. No propellers. It's a shark among minnows, a vision of the 1950s dropped into 1944. Its pilots are an elite caste, and they are untouchable in the sky, when they can fly. You talk to the ground crew, their hands black with grease and soot. They tell you the truth in hushed, frustrated tones. The genius Jumo 004 engines are devouring themselves. Their average operational life isn't 100 hours. It's not 50. It is, if they are lucky, 12 hours. The high-temperature alloys needed for the turbine blades simply don't exist in your resource-starved Reich, so you make do with substitutes that creep, warp, and fail. The revolutionary weapon spends more time being repaired than it does in combat. Worse, you know that this miracle weapon was delayed for years, first by bureaucratic infighting, and then by Hitler's own demand that it be redesigned as a high-speed bomber, a role for which it was never intended. This is the system. It's not a mistake. It's a feature. Your leadership is addicted to the silver bullet. They don't want a war of attrition. They want a war of miracles. They demand quantum leaps. Your entire scientific establishment is geared towards creating the single, perfect war-ending weapon. It scorns the iterative, the simple, the good enough. It is a philosophy that builds exquisite, unworkable prototypes, while the enemy builds relentless, practical, functional armies. You are standing in a cathedral of your own genius, admiring the architecture as the roof caves in. The image of the grounded Me-262, a perfect machine betrayed by its own fragile genius, haunts you. The King Tiger, A steel behemoth mired in mud is a monument to flawed perfection. Now you force your mind to turn away from your own cathedrals of steel and look at what the enemy is building. Your gaze sweeps across the battlefield in Normandy, and you see them. They are not beautiful. They are not terrifying. They are everywhere. They look like a procession of tall green boxes on tracks. This is the M4 Sherman. You've studied this machine. As a German engineer, you almost feel insulted by it. The design is primitive, a relic of 1930s industrial thinking. The armor is thin and vertical, a shell magnet. The silhouette is ridiculously high, making it an easy target. The main gun on the early models is a low-velocity 75mm pea shooter, useless against your Panthers. Your crews mock them. They have a dozen grim nicknames, the most popular being the Ronson, after the lighter's advertising slogan, "Lights up the first time, every time." Your aces, your Panzer Knights, rack up kills against them like it's a sport, painting rings on their gun barrels for everyone they destroy. This machine is, by every metric you hold dear, a bad tank. And then you stop thinking like an engineer and start thinking like a logistician. The laughter dies in your throat. You look again, and a cold, profound terror begins to creep in. You realize you have been looking at the wrong weapon. The weapon isn't the M4 Sherman. The weapon is the arsenal of democracy that builds it. You have stumbled upon the Allied counter-philosophy, the gospel of good enough. The Americans didn't sit down in 1940 to design the best tank in the world. They sat down to design the best tank they could mass-produce by the tens of thousands. And you realize those are two very, very different goals. Your Tiger is hand-built by specialists, like a fine watch. The Sherman is bolted together on a moving assembly line that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at 10 different but collaborating factories. While you were arguing over the optics of the Panther's gun sight, the Americans were standardizing the bolts. While you were perfecting your exotic interleaved suspension, the Americans were making their engine simple enough to be repaired in a muddy field with a basic wrench. And then you see the true genius, the part that chills you to the bone. Iteration. The Ronson, the flammable ammo. You see the intelligence briefs from 1944. The new Shermans, the M4A3E8s, have wet ammunition stowage, extinguishing fires before they can start. The pea shooter gun? They've upgunned it, mounting a high-velocity 76mm cannon that can and does kill your Panthers. The Allies aren't just building, they are learning, adapting, and modifying on the assembly line. Your system demands perfection from the start. Their system embraces imperfection as a starting point. They find a flaw, they report it, and 1,000 factories apply the fix. You find a flaw in the King Tiger, and a committee must be formed. By the time your perfect fix is approved, another 10,000 Shermans have rolled off the line. You finally look at the real numbers. You built 1,347 Tiger E-tanks. You will build in total 492 King Tigers. The Americans and their allies? They built nearly 50,000 Shermans. You see it now, the terrible, unequal arithmetic of the battlefield. Your single Tiger, in its perfect sniper position, kills one Sherman. It kills a second. It kills a third. But the crew of the 4th Sherman, the good enough tank, has radioed your position. The crew of the 5th Sherman, coming from the flank, is already firing. Your perfect turret, driven by its slow hydraulic motor, cannot traverse fast enough. The war isn't one-on-one duels. It is a war of systems, and their system, built on the gospel of good enough, is burying yours under a relentless tide of steel. You're still reeling from the terrible arithmetic of the 50,000 Shermans. You see how the gospel of good enough, when combined with mass production, becomes a physical law of attrition. But now, you uncover something even more insidious, a threat that strikes not at your industrial base, but at the very soul of your scientific philosophy. You thought the Sherman was crude. You were wrong. You now see that the Allies don't just iterate within one system, they combine systems. Your eyes are drawn to the sky, to the reports from your exhausted Luftwaffe pilots. They are not just being beaten, they are being hunted. And the hunter has a strange pedigree. You first saw reports on it in 1942. The P-51 Mustang, an American-built plane, and it was fine. It was a decent low-altitude fighter, but nothing special. It was powered by an Allison engine that wheezed and struggled above 15,000 feet. Your Me-109s and FW-190s could handle it. It was, once again, good enough. Then, sometime in 1943, the reports change. The pilots' voices become frantic. The P-51 is no longer a fine airplane. It is a monster. It is a silver-skinned demon that meets your bombers at the German border and stays with them all the way to Berlin. It climbs faster, flies higher, and outmaneuvers your best pilots. What happened? You dig into the intelligence files, and you find the answer. It wasn't an order from a Führer. It wasn't a grand top-down 5-year plan. It was a suggestion, a bit of tinkering. A British test pilot, seeing the sleek American airframe, simply wondered what would happen if he put his engine into it. It was the marriage of two different democratic collaborating systems. The American airframe from North American Aviation, a masterpiece of laminar flow wing design and mass production. And the British engine, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, a high-performance, two-stage supercharged marvel. This is the collaborative superweapon. The British, in the middle of a desperate war, simply gave the Americans their best engine, and the Americans, without bureaucratic pride, redesigned their plane to fit it. The result, the P-51D, was a hybrid, a mongrel, and it became the single greatest piston engine fighter of the war. As a German engineer, you are staggered. This isn't how genius works. Genius is pure, it is focused, it is German. Your Me-262 project is a walled garden, a secret jealously guarded by one company. The idea of sharing your crown jewel Jumo engine with, say, the Italians to put in a Machi airframe is not just inefficient, it's profane. And the P-51 isn't the only one. You see whispers of another, even more terrifying collaboration. A weapon so secret it's just called the VT fuse. It's a proximity fuse. You've had your own scientists working on this concept for years, trying to use acoustic or infrared triggers. They all failed, deemed too complex. The Allies, you discover, took a different path. They decided to put a tiny 5-tube radio transceiver inside the nose of an artillery shell. You almost laugh at the absurdity. A radio with fragile vacuum tubes that has to survive being shot out of a cannon at 20,000 times the force of gravity. It's impossible. But they did it. Not one lab, but 80 of them. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, RCA, General Electric, all working together, a decentralized, democratic, collaborative network of genius. While your brilliant, isolated scientists were competing for the Führer's favor, their scientists were on the phone with each other. The first time you see the results is in a report from the Battle of the Bulge. Your hardened veterans of the Wehrmacht, advancing through the Ardennes, are suddenly being eviscerated. The American artillery isn't just landing near them, it's exploding 50 feet above their foxholes, a storm of lethal, perfectly timed shrapnel. Your soldiers are being cut to ribbons before they even hear the whistle of the shell. They call it magic. You call it the proximity fuse. You realize the Allies' greatest weapon isn't a tank or a plane. It's their ability to trust each other. It's a system of innovation that is fluid, fast, egoless, and collaborative. And you, with your rigid top-down hierarchy, have no counter for it. The proximity fuse, that magic shell, was a weapon of collaborative genius. But now you turn your attention from the small and clever to the large and brutal. You move from the laboratory to the assembly line, and it is here, in the raw, unfiltered data, that the confession truly begins. You are no longer an engineer. You are an auditor, and you are standing before the metrics of shock. First, you are at a shipyard, not a traditional shipyard like the ones you know in Hamburg or Kiel, where a single proud vessel grows from a keel over a year or more. This is something else. You are in Richmond, California. You stand before Henry Kaiser's Yard Number 2. It doesn't smell like the sea. It smells of ozone, welding smoke, and burning paint. The ground doesn't rumble with the ocean. It shakes with the rhythm of 1,000 gantry cranes. You are witnessing a system that has transformed shipbuilding from a craft into a manufacturing process. Hollywood got this wrong. They made it look like simple, patriotic work. The reality is something far more terrifying to you. It's a system of radical simplification and massive prefabricated assembly. You watch a 250-ton section of a ship's double bottom, complete with plumbing and electrical, being welded together in a separate fabrication bay. You then watch as a colossal crane, one of a dozen, lifts this entire section, the size of a building, and lowers it perfectly into place on the ways. It's not a ship being built. It's a 10,000-ton cargo vessel being snapped together like a child's model. You look at the numbers. The Liberty ship, a 440-foot, 10,800-ton ocean-going vessel. Your own submarines, the U-boats, are the apex predators of the Atlantic. Your veteran crews are sinking these ships at a staggering rate. And it doesn't matter. Your best shipyards, with your master craftsmen, take 9, maybe 10 months to build a single complex U-boat. The Americans, using this crude prefabrication and a workforce of newly trained welders, many of them women, are averaging 40 days per Liberty ship. Then you see the record, the SS Robert E. Peary. You have to read the report 3 times to believe it. It wasn't built in weeks. It was laid down, assembled from prefabricated modules, and launched in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. A 10,000-ton ship, in less than 5 days. You realize your entire U-boat strategy, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, is strategically obsolete. You aren't fighting their navy. You are fighting this shipyard. You are sinking individual vessels, and they are defeating you with a spreadsheet. The shock sends you reeling inland. You are in Michigan. You stand inside a building so vast, it has its own weather system. This is Ford's Willow Run, a factory 1 mile long. You've heard rumors about it, but the reality is a nightmare of efficiency. They are not building B-24 Liberator heavy bombers here, they are extruding them. The assembly line, a direct descendant of the one that built the Model T, moves relentlessly. You see a fuselage here, a wing section there, all flowing towards a final mating jig. The scale makes a modern gigafactory look modest. At its peak, this single building, driven by 42,000 workers, was pushing one complete 4-engine, 1.8 million part heavy bomber off the line. Every 63 minutes, you do the math, every single hour, around the clock, a new bomber. You think of your own Heinkel 177 program, plagued by failing engines and bureaucratic chaos, producing a mere trickle. The Americans are building one type of heavy bomber in one factory faster than your entire nation can produce all of its multi-engine aircraft combined. This is the avalanche. This is the moment you know the war is lost. Your V-2, your Me-262, they are grains of sand against this tidal wave. Production, you realize, isn't just a part of the Allied strategy. Production is the strategy, and it is unstoppable. You are no longer an engineer. You are now a minister. You are Albert Speer, and you are sitting in your vast, sterile office in Berlin, and you are living a nightmare. You are the architect of the German production miracle. When you took over in 1942, the war economy was a chaotic mess of competing fiefdoms. You, with your singular genius for organization, streamlined it. You rationalized. You centralized. You performed miracles. You look at your own charts and the lines go up, up, up. Tank production is up 300%. Aircraft production is up 400%. Ammunition output is staggering. You are wringing every last drop of blood and steel from the Reich, and you are succeeding. You are, in your own mind, the single greatest industrial manager in the world. And then a report lands on your desk. It's not a battlefield assessment. It's a copy of a publicly available American industrial abstract. It's just numbers, statistics. And as you read it, the ink seems to blur, the blood draining from your face. The charts on your wall, once a source of immense pride, become a pathetic joke. You look at your miraculous production of 1,000 fighter planes in a single month, a heroic, backbreaking national effort. And the report in your hand shows that the Americans, in that same month, produced over 9,000. You look at your total entire war production of 1,300 Tiger I tanks, the pride of the Panzerwaffe, and you see that the Americans built 50,000 Shermans. You see the Soviets built 60,000 T-34s. You read about Willow Run, that 1-mile-long factory, and its bomber an hour, a callback to Section 5. You read about Kaiser's shipyards launching vessels in 5 days. This isn't a war. It is an industrial extermination. This is the confession. It is the moment Albert Speer's nightmare becomes reality. You finally understand. You have been running a race, sprinting with all your might, only to look up and see your opponent is not on foot, but is piloting a locomotive that is a mile wide. You realize with a chilling philosophical clarity that your ideology is dead. The entire foundation of your state, the belief in the Übermensch, the singular genius, the master race, has been weighed, measured, and found wanting. It has been defeated by a messy, chaotic, inefficient-looking system called democracy. It has been beaten by a system that trusts its people, a system that allows a factory in Detroit to collaborate with a lab in California, a system that doesn't care about the pride of its engineers, only about the result. You see the truth. The Allies are not winning despite their decadent system. They are winning because of it. Their system, which you mocked as disorganized, is in fact a highly adaptive, resilient, collaborative network. Your system, which you praised as pure and focused, is a brittle, top-down, paranoid hierarchy that stifles innovation. You go to the Führer, you show him the numbers, you tell him, in the sterile language of a technocrat, that the war is over. The war is lost on the production front, you say. You explain that the Wunderwaffen, the V-2s, and the jets are irrelevant. They are rounding errors in the enemy's calculations. This is the great unspoken confession of the Nazi leadership. It is the moment the high priests of the master race looked at a crude, green, mass-produced American tank and realized it was the chariot of a superior god. It wasn't a god of thunder or steel, but the quiet, relentless god of the assembly line. The ideological collapse is complete. The war for the 1,000-year Reich was defeated, not by a better soldier, but by a better system. A system built not by supermen, but by the very masses you held in contempt. You stand in Albert Speer's silent, cavernous office, a callback to Section 6, the confession of his industrial failure hanging in the air. His master race of supermen, his singular geniuses, were defeated by who? By the masses. Now you finally turn your gaze to see who they really are. You're going to meet the arsenal of we the people. You travel back to the Willow Run factory. You look past the B-24s rolling off the line every hour. You look at the hands guiding the rivets. You see a young woman, her hair tied up in a bandana. 6 months ago, she might have been a housewife, a secretary, or a shopgirl. Now she is a master welder running a perfect bead on a bomber's wing spar. She is Rosie the Riveter, and she is not a myth or a poster. She is one of 18 million women who stepped out of their prescribed roles and into the factories. You realize the Allies' secret weapon wasn't just industrial, it was social. While your Nazi ideology was clinging to a Kinder, Kutsche, Kirche philosophy, locking away half its potential workforce, the Allies were executing the single greatest, fastest workforce mobilization in human history. They trusted their people. They believed that a waitress could learn to build a supercharged Merlin engine. And they were right. Then you are in France, August 1944. The breakout from Normandy is a success, but Patton's Third Army is moving so fast it has outrun its supplies. The tanks are literally running dry. The advance is about to stall. The solution is not a wonder weapon, it's a highway. You are riding in the passenger seat of a GMC Deuce and a Half, part of a convoy that stretches from the beaches of Normandy to the front, bumper to bumper, for over 600 miles. The air is thick with dust and diesel fumes. You look at the driver. His eyes are red-rimmed with fatigue. He is an African-American soldier. He is part of the Red Ball Express, a logistics operation run almost entirely by segregated black units. These men, driving 24 hours a day, under threat of ambush, on roads still mined, are the lifeblood of the entire Allied invasion. They are part of a system that, while denying them full rights at home, trusted them to execute the most critical supply run of the war. You realize the war isn't just won by the P-51, a callback to Section 4. It's won by this 2.5-ton truck and the overlooked man driving it. This is the moment you correct the final lingering myth. You look back at the crude Sherman, a callback to Section 3. You've heard it 1,000 times in pop culture. Shermans were bad tanks. But now you see the truth. It wasn't a crude tank, it was a sustainable tank, it was a reliable tank. Its simple design and standardized parts meant it could be repaired in a muddy field with a wrench. That bad tank had a 75% operational readiness rate, while your perfect Tigers were lucky to hit 35%. The Allied arsenal wasn't crude, it was the physical manifestation of a different kind of genius, the genius of logistics, reliability, and iteration. The true wonder weapon wasn't the V2, it was the decentralized, collaborative, and human system that could design, build, ship, repair, and improve millions of good enough tools all at the same time. This system's legacy didn't just win the war, it built the modern world, from the space race to Silicon Valley. The roar of the Willow Run factory fades. The rumble of the Red Ball Express goes quiet. The static of the proximity fuse is gone. You stand here, in the present, surrounded by a world that was forged by these invisible forces. The war was won, not by a single flash of perfect singular genius, but by the relentless, collaborative, and messy power of a system that believed in its own people. It was won by the hands of the welder, the mind of the logistics planner, and the driver who refused to stop. The lesson of the invisible front is that the greatest superweapon ever built isn't a machine, it's a method. It's the system that allows millions of ordinary people to come together and achieve the impossible.